In 2019, Skoda announced the Vision IV. It was a concept all-electric vehicle and it left me jaw-dropped. It kind of reminded me of the Lamborghini Urus, except something that looked a little less aggressive and yet quite practical. Now we've got the production model, the Enyaq IV. This all-electric SUV very much competes with its sibling, the VW ID.4, and among other vehicles out there on the market, such as the Kia e-Niro, the Hyundai Kona Electric, the Kia Soul EV, and others. Now, the Enyaq IV starts from around £32,000. That is, however, if you get the IV60, which has a smaller battery pack. If you opt for the IV80, which we have on review over here, it'll cost you around £39,000. Now, at the time of filming, that is actually a little bit cheaper than the VW alternative. The ID.4 in its base level trim with a 77 kilowatt hour battery pack comes in at £42,000. Now, I know that's quite a bit of a mouthful and a lot to intake, so if you do want to have some more information about the different trim levels and indeed how they compare, do check out our written review. It will be down in the description below or indeed in the pinned comments. And before proceeding with this review, if you haven't already, do consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification, of course, if you like what you see at the end of the review. So let's kick off this review and talk about its exterior design, and subjectively I prefer it over the VW ID.4. However, I just wish that Skoda had retained the Vision IV's singular headlight design, which stretched around the front grille of the vehicle. Instead, on the Enyaq IV, the production model, you've got a bit more of a traditional look, two headlights and a rather oversized covered grille. Now, nevertheless, the car has got quite a muscular and sporty look. Some might associate it with certain Audi vehicles out there. I mean, they do come from the Volkswagen group anyway, but here you've got a little bit of a flared bonnet. You've got some nice air ducts which sit on the side of the front bumper, feeding air towards the wheel and giving a little bit more aerodynamic efficiency, whilst also bolstering its kind of sporty look. Now, at the side you've got body coloured wheel arches, which is a definite plus point in my books in comparison to the VW ID.4's plastic inserts instead. Now, you do get 19-inch alloys that come as standard. Pictured over here are the 21-inch alloys that are an additional option. Now, going around the side of the car, you've also got some plastic side skirts which don't really detract from the look and make it a little bit more practical. As for the rear of the vehicle, it does look a little less sporty despite the inclusion of a little spoiler. Here it's got a bit more of a family type of orientation, at least in my opinion. There's nothing too wrong or too special about it, but I definitely do like its tail light design, which goes hand in hand with the headlights and gives the car a little bit of that extra bit of flair. Now, I should also point out that the Skoda Enyaq IV is slightly longer and wider in comparison to the VW ID.4. Now, the differences are minimal and the numbers will be on your screen right now. However, it's just something I thought to point out, specifically when it comes to parking. Now, transitioning inside the cabin, I must say Skoda has retained that sense of class, but also a sense of practicality as well. Now, I have to just quickly note the EcoSuite material that we've got on review over here. Now, while the car costs around £41,000 without any options, here the material that's been used has been tanned using olive trees, which just bolsters its eco credentials. But not only that, it absolutely looks stunning. This kind of tan look to it is definitely appreciated, at least in my books. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about practicality, because here there's a few more physical buttons on show in comparison to the VW ID.4. First off, along the dashboard there's a few quick access buttons which are definitely appreciated, and the steering wheel as well has got physical buttons rather than haptic feedback buttons. However, there are certain sort of annoyances that still retain here from the VW ID.4. Take, for example, the capacitive touch slider that's found underneath the 13-inch display. Here it's to adjust the volume. There's no physical volume knob. Similarly with the climate controls, while the quick access button is very appreciated, I would have just liked physical climate control buttons instead, because you have to faff around with the display while you're driving, which just seems counterintuitive when it comes to a safety point of view. Nevertheless, the 13-inch display is very clear. It is center weighted, so therefore it's not angled towards the driver, which I do feel is a slightly missed trick, but the display itself is very vivid and provides multi-touch input. Furthermore, it integrates with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay as standard, and there's even wireless Android Auto on display as well, and therefore means that you can use SmartLink to connect up to your infotainment system without having to plug in anything in. Now, there are two Type-C ports found underneath the dashboard unit by the center console, and here you'll also find two non-slip bays for your smartphone. Now, the bays as well can be transformed to wireless charging pads if you go for a certain option, so that's just a little bit of an extra nod for technology. Now, also on the center console there is a physical gear selector, which is just very much appreciated. While it's not a traditional gear selector because it's kind of redundant in EVs, I do prefer it over the one that's found on the steering column that you'd see on the VW ID.4. It just means that getting used to the Skoda Enyaq IV's interior is just a little bit easier for those people who are not acclimatized or used to driving electric vehicles. Now, another nod over its Volkswagen sibling is the fact that the vehicle has 8 speakers that come as standard. There's also the Canton audio system that will be offered as an option very soon, and that will offer 12 speakers with a subwoofer as well, so that is very much appreciated for audiophiles. Now, if you'd like a detailed review of the audio system, do check it up on your pop-up banner in the description below or in the pinned comments, where I'll go into a lot more detail about the stock 8-speaker system that's present in this Enyaq IV. What I will say in a nutshell is that it does very good and very much competes with the VW ID.4. If anything, it outshines it because it offers 2 extra audio drivers. Now, on the subject of technology, there is also a fully digitalized 5.3-inch instrument cluster, which is very vivid and provides all the key information. Furthermore, here you get integrated data with Google Maps, so if you're using Android Auto, for example, and therefore you get some turn-by based navigation data. While it's very simplistic, it's definitely appreciated over those systems which don't integrate it at all, as it keeps your eyes planted on the road. On that note, you can also add a head-up display as an additional option. It doesn't come as standard, but it's just something that will bolster the overall safety credentials of the Enyaq IV, specifically when you're driving at speed. Now, in front of you as the driver, you do of course have the steering wheel, which is very easy to grip and has got the right ergonomics, at least in my opinion. You do also have the physical buttons, which I've referenced before, and you've got these nice stylish little wheels which are to adjust the volume or adjust certain settings on the instrument cluster. Behind the wheel, you've just got some flappy paddles and stalks. Now, the flappy paddles are to adjust the regenerative braking level, and we'll touch upon this further down in this review, but it's just something I thought to mention in this segment. So next up, we get onto storage space, and let's concentrate as to what you get within the cabin first. Now, you have got those 2 little storage bays which I referenced before by the center console. You've got 2 cup holders as well, and you've got a little plastic insert which allows you to remove it and expand that storage space. Then you've got a little bit larger storage compartment, which is useful for placing, let's say, a smartphone or some loose change, or let's say a wallet or small size purse. And then you've got the center armrest. Now, the center armrest is a lot larger, and it even has a little compartment over here which you can remove, so therefore even expanding on the storage or compartmentalizing it. Here, a large size purse will fit with ease, and the fact that it serves as an armrest means that it can be adjusted as well, which is a small little nod in terms of comfort. Now, there's a glove compartment as well, which is pretty large, and you've got rather large door bins both at the front and at the rear of the cabin, which is definitely appreciated. Now, other than cabin space, of course, the most important part for some people coming to this review is the boot capacity. And here, the Skoda Enyaq IV is absolutely humongous. It offers 585 litres of usable storage space. If you are to prop down the seats, this figure extends up to 1,710 litres. Just to give you some perspective, the ID.4 offers 543 and 1,575 litres respectively, basically meaning that the Skoda Enyaq IV just is a more practical car. Now, the only downside is the fact that when you do prop down the seats, that there is a quite significant lip between the underfloor of the boot and the rear segment of the rear seats. However, you can get an adjustable boot floor for around a £300 option, so this might negate that issue. Elsewhere, the boot lip is protected, so you don't have to worry about scratching too much in terms of your paintwork, and there's not too much of a raised boot lip either, which means that taking in and out goods might be quite convenient. There is also some storage spaces on the sides and some underfloor storage compartments for your charging cables, which just makes it quite practical. Furthermore, there's some hooks and even a 12-volt socket as well, which just add to the overall practicality. Now, the retractable boot load cover is also really useful because it allows to protect your valuables from prying eyes, and also the boot cover lid can be removed as well if you don't want to use it. Now, it should also be pointed out that the Enyaq IV, very much like the ID.4, has got a 60-40 split in terms of its rear seat, and has also got an integrated ski latch, which is very handy if you want to transport elongated goods. Now, my biggest complaint about the boot of the Enyaq IV is the fact that it doesn't have an electric tailgate that comes as standard. Indeed, you have to purchase a £1,240 option in order to have the electric tailgate and kick function, which I just think is just a little bit overpriced because you have to add a few different options on top. Now, if you go for the manual release button, it's very easy to open up, but it's a different matter when it comes to closing. Not only is the boot lid just quite heavy, but it's also something that might be at a little bit of an arm's reach for shorter individuals. I've got no issues as someone who's just under 6 foot, but just something to be mindful of. And it's very much the same sort of case with the VW ID.4, so its Volkswagen alternative does have pretty much the same sort of fate in this department. Now, on the plus side, headroom and legroom is absolutely spectacular, both at the front and at the rear of the cabin. I'm just under 6 foot and I can pretty much fully extend my legs, and in terms of headroom, well, if you were just 6'7" even, I think you'll fit at the rear or at the front of the cabin, which is pretty much extremely impressive and somewhat rare. It's certainly a step up over the Hyundai Kona Electric, for example. Now, the only thing I should bear in mind is for your rear occupants, the seats are slightly diagonally wedged, and as a result your knees will sit slightly higher than your pelvis, which might be a little bit uncomfortable. Although this might be a non-issue for those people who don't mind slouching a little bit or extending out their legs, and as a result your knees will sit a little bit further down. Now, at the rear you can seat 3 occupants, but if you're not going to use the middle seat, you can bring it down and therefore show an armrest, so it's a little bit more comfortable for longer journeys. And you've also got 2 cup holder spaces here as well, all very good so far. However, I do have a slight bone to pick with Skoda, and I'm going to have to resort to my smartphone over here because there's a few list of options. Now, if you want the little retractable sun blinds which come over here, and you want the electronic child lock and the rear USB slots, you'll have to spend £330, which might not seem too much, but it's just worth pointing out. If you want the little tables which come over here on the rear segment of the front seats, that is £470. Now, the biggest thing, however, is the seats. Now, if you want front electric seats, and you'll have to add a variety of different options on top of this, because the front seats for some reason are combined with some other options in Skoda's list, it will go up to £1,125. If you want both front seats to be electric, it'll go £1,565, which is quite frankly quite ridiculous. Then moving on from that, if you want heated seats, it's £400 for the front 2. If you want the rear seats heated as well, this is an additional £310. As for the steering wheel, if you want that heated, that's £285. Now, if you add up all these options, you're looking at a pretty large extra option bill, which I find is a little bit ridiculous given the fact that a car starts from £39,000. Cars that cost £32,000, namely from Hyundai and Kia, come with a lot of these features as standard or don't cost as much, and therefore make it a little bit more sensible when it comes to choosing these options. Now, another annoyance is the way that the car operates. Now, fundamentally this is fantastic if you're a single occupant, although I can't really imagine that's going to be the case if you're buying this vehicle. But if you're going to be on your own driving, then as soon as you step inside the car as the driver, the pressure sensor that's found in the front seat will power on the infotainment system. As soon as you put your foot on the brake pedal, the car will kind of light up and all these systems will be operational and ready for you to drive. Of course, if the doors are closed and you've got a seat belt and everything like that, although you can do that, but it starts beeping at you. What is the annoying factor, however, is that if you are to step outside the vehicle or even lift off your seat, the car is going to start realizing, oh, there's no one in the driver's seat, panic mode, we're going to power everything down. Now, I know what I did over there is not quite natural. You wouldn't be really doing that, even though you might sometimes lift off from your seat if you want to check the curb, for example, and you don't want to hit the curb. But what is more common is, let's say you are the driver and you've got some occupants, specifically let's say teenagers at the back. You pop out to the newsagents because you've quickly parked up and you don't want the infotainment system or the climate controls to power down. Well, alas, that's the case, because that's what's going to happen in the Skoda Enyaq IV. The only way to overwrite this function is the fact that the key fob has to be inside the car. You have to then reach over to the infotainment system and tap the on and off button, and or reach over to the steering column and press the physical on and off start switch, which I just feel is just a little bit cumbersome. For a vehicle of its class, I would expect it to be very, well, welcoming to people who have got families, but that doesn't seem to be the case with the Enyaq IV, and very much the same sort of comments were had in the VW ID.3 and the VW ID.4. So now we move on to driving comfort, and I'm just going to go off from a standstill. Now, first off, I do have to talk about visibility, which is absolutely excellent in the Enyaq IV. Here, the A-pillars are relatively small, and therefore I can easily see in terms of my corner vision when I'm taking a turn. And there's even a small little cutout just by the window, which promotes even further visibility. Now, at the front, it's absolutely excellent because it's got a large size windscreen, and the same could be said at the rear. Now, in the Enyaq IV80, which is on review over here, you've got front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera that come as standard. In the IV60, however, the rear view camera and also the front parking sensors are an option, which is slightly a shame to see in a car that would have cost £32,000 and above. Now, as for cabin noise, it's extremely minimal. The cabin is very well insulated, and as a result, when you're pottering around town at relatively low speeds, you're gonna very much hear, well, pretty much nothing from the exterior noise, and that's without the acoustic side windows that come as an option because they didn't come fitted in this press car. Furthermore, if you're going to be driving at speed, there's very little tire noise that creeps in on the motorway, which is again somewhat surprising for a vehicle that has 21-inch alloys, at least again in the model that we have on review. So ultimately what I'm trying to say over here is that even without the option, Skoda have done a phenomenal job in order to minimize the exterior noise and effectively increase the comfort. Now, depending on the setup you like, it's actually quite surprising that the Enyaq IV has somewhat hard suspension. If you're pottering around town like I'm doing now and there's some uneven surfaces or speed bumps, you're definitely going to feel them, which isn't something I said about the VW ID.4, which has a little bit more of a floaty suspension setup. Now, on the flip side of this is the fact that if you're going to be driving at speed on the country roads, the Enyaq IV provides a far bettered experience, whereby the car won't suffer from too much body roll and stays relatively well planted to the ground. And this differentiates it from its VW counterpart, making it a car that incites a little bit more confidence when going around at speed. Now, on the subject of performance, the Enyaq IV as standard comes with a rear mounted motor, unsurprisingly on the rear axle, and here the vehicle dispatches 150 kilowatts of power, which equates to 201 horsepower. Now, this will mean that you have got 310 Newton meters of torque that's readily available and a top speed of 99 miles an hour. Not so great for those German viewers out there on the German Autobahn. Now, when it comes to its 0 to 60 test, I had it tested via RaceLogic's V-Box Sport in 7.95 seconds, which is perfectly nippy, but not quite as nippy as the slightly lighter VW ID.4, which achieves the same amount of speed, in other words 60 miles an hour from a standstill, in 7.31 seconds. Now, while performance is of course very important, electric range is what really sets apart the Enyaq IV from its sibling, the ID.4. Indeed, here both cars, at least the two tested cars, had a 77 kilowatt hour battery pack. And despite this fact, the ID.4 achieved 260 miles, which is perfectly respectable, although didn't really set itself apart from the Kia Soul EV, the Kia e-Niro or the Hyundai Kona Electric, which all achieved a similar figure. And while the ID.3 hatchback achieved around 230 miles, well, the Enyaq IV takes it that one step further. I achieved around 300 miles in mixed driving conditions. That is with the climate controls on, with ambient temperatures around 10 to 15 centigrade, and for me driving in normal mode and launching it every now and then. Indeed, the Enyaq IV surpasses its Volkswagen sibling, and not only marginally, but by around 40 miles. Now you should also consider that the Enyaq IV on review does not have an integrated heat pump, which by the way is an additional £1,000, nor did the ID.4. So one could potentially expect around 260 to 300 miles with the ID.4 with the integrated heat pump, and a staggering 300 to potentially 330 miles on the Enyaq IV. Indeed, the Enyaq IV is one of the longest range EVs I've tested to date, and it really took me by surprise. Now, for those people who've come to this review and are looking for the IV60, unfortunately I can't comment on it. Although the WLTP test cycle suggests around 260 miles, well, realistically expect 210 to 220 miles, which is still a very respectable score, and one that will definitely suffice for a lot of consumers out there. Now, for you to recoup energy back into the battery pack, you can use regenerative braking. Now, this can be achieved by pressing down on the regular brake pedal, and therefore you'll recoup energy like that. But for EV drivers or those seasoned EV drivers, you might expect one pedal driving. In other words, you having the accelerate pedal and lifting off the accelerate pedal to decelerate the vehicle. Well, unfortunately here you've only got one mode in the Enyaq IV, very much like the ID.3 and the ID.4. The regenerative braking is relatively light, and while you can do some stop and go when you're going around at around 20 miles an hour, if you're going to be going any faster, then you have to expect to press on the brake pedal, because the car will not come to a complete standstill, and furthermore is, well, just a little bit light for my liking. I wish that VW, or Skoda in this respect, would have integrated different regenerative braking levels through the infotainment system like the Hyundai counterparts, and therefore allowed you to customize the level. And an annoyance over here is the fact that each time you do step inside the vehicle, the car resets its regenerative braking level. In other words, B mode doesn't get activated each time you step in, even if that was the last driving mode, and instead you have to shift down on the gear selector found on the center console, in other words, to initiate B mode. Now, I did reference the flappy paddles found behind the steering wheel, and indeed these do adjust the regenerative braking level. However, not in B mode. You can't adjust it. The only way you can adjust it is if you shift down to D mode or drive, and then here you'll have the regenerative, well, the recuperation levels, and here you can use the flappy paddles to go between level 1, 2 and 3, 3 being the harshest mode and one that is a little bit more similar to B mode. But again, B mode takes the cake in this department and still is the harshest regenerative braking level, which again, as I mentioned, isn't as harsh as I would have liked it to be. Now, given this is an electric vehicle, you can plug it in, and as a result you have got a CCS and Type 2 input. Now, the CCS input does support up to 125 kilowatts of input. However, this isn't as standard on the IV80 or the IV60, and indeed you will have to purchase around £440 option for this. Now, here what you'll find is that from 0 to 80% it will take around 38 minutes. If you were to opt for a 50 kilowatt input charge, which is a lot more common on UK highways, here the time will extend to 1 hour and 10 minutes. Now, if you were to opt for a 7 kilowatt input, which is a lot more common when it comes to work or home place chargers, or indeed public chargers which aren't rapid, it will take a whopping 13 hours to go from 0 to 100%. Given the real estate that you have with the battery pack, that's not too surprising on the 77 kilowatt hour variant. Now, moving on from here, we get onto the driver assistance systems, and quite frankly, there's another annoyance over here, which again steps from the Volkswagen group, which was similar on the ID.3 and the ID.4, and that's to do with lane assistance. Now, lane assistance does come as standard and does get enabled as standard each time you step inside the vehicle. So as a result, if you do not like the system, and given the fact that we don't have that many physical buttons, be it in the Volkswagen or Skoda vehicles, it means that you have to press the quick access button, faff around with the infotainment system every single time you step inside the car. And I must say, lane assistance is useful if you're going to go for longer journeys, but when you're pottering around town or let's say on the country roads, it's not a system that I personally like using, and found it very cumbersome to have to disable it every single time. Now the reasoning behind this is because it's been tested by Euro NCAP, and the Enyaq IV scored a staggering 5 out of 5 stars. It did a phenomenal job in terms of its adult occupancy and in terms of even child occupancy, which was an extremely impressive result for a car of its size and class and price. So as a result, you can definitely rest assured that if you are in a serious accident, the Enyaq IV will keep you and your children very much secure. Now past that, there are the driver assistance system, which I should have referenced before rather than going into the Euro NCAP bit, but I just have to pull over here because I have to read the option on my phone. It is somewhat ridiculous. Now if you want the adaptive cruise control blind spot or the traffic jam assist, it's going to come in at £685. If you want emergency assist, the lane assist plus, that will come in at £915, which to me is again a bit ridiculous given the fact that we are talking about a car that costs £39,000 if not above with the IV80, and with even the IV60 you're looking at a £32,000 car. Just by comparison, the Kia Soul EV has all of these features as standard and, well, comes in at £32,500, making the Skoda Enyaq IV and its Volkswagen counterparts look overpriced and a little bit silly with their included options. And so this all leads me on to my verdict. What do I make about the Skoda Enyaq IV? Well, frankly, some people might label this car as a rebranded VW ID.4. However, this car has its own place in the market, at least in my opinion. It's got a larger boot capacity, a more practical interior, and despite the two cars sharing the same 77 kilowatt-hour battery pack, the Skoda Enyaq IV actually achieves a better range at around 300 miles versus the ID.4's 260 mile range. Now, as a result, this is just the better vehicle, in my opinion, and just offers a more practical car for those people who are looking for an electric SUV. So as a result, it actually gets our Best Buy award. Now, you should also consider some other vehicles which also got our Best Buy award. The Kia e-Niro, which is a fantastic alternative that comes in at £32,500, which makes this car look rather expensive. Then you've got the absolutely feature-packed Kia Soul EV, which won't have the same sort of look and design as its SUV counterparts, but is completely feature-rich and makes the Skoda option list look absolutely ridiculous. And then you've got the likes of the Hyundai Kona Electric, which offer a little bit more of a compact size, but still giving you a fantastic range of around 260 miles. Now these three cars are great alternatives, and you should definitely check out the reviews. They'll be down in the description below and for your consideration. So I'm going to leave this video and ask you a question. Which car would you choose? VW ID.4, Skoda Enyaq IV, the Kia alternative, the e-Niro or the Soul EV, or the Hyundai Kona Electric? Or of course, if there's some other cars out there you feel compete in this same sort of space, do let me know in the comments below. I'd be very much intrigued to hear your thoughts. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, do drop a like, as it do be appreciated. If you haven't already, do consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification to see more independent, detailed reviews from the channel. Alright, I've been Chris from TotallyEV. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.